Welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast, where we're all about sharing the forbidden secrets and slightly embellished truths about corporate cybersecurity programs. We're ranting, we're raving, and we're telling you the stuff that nobody talks about on their fancy website and trade show giveaways, all to protect you from cyber criminals. And now, here's your hosts, Mike Rotondo, Zach Fuller, and Lauro Chavez.
Hello and welcome to the Cyber Rants Podcast. This is your co-host, Zach Fuller, joined by Mike Rotondo and Lauro Chavez. What are you guys having for lunch today?
Security.
I'm having fish tacos and a couple of nice Scottsdale blondes. The beer, not the human.
Yeah, I gotcha. You gotta probably live in Arizona to understand that. That's a very common beer there. For those of you in Massachusetts or wherever, it's not cannibals here.
It's made by Huss. Yeah, you can check it out.
I've got pen testing work for lunch with a couple double shots, to drink. So and I mean the coffee, not the scotch.
Bite a Metasploit Professional with some Qualis on the side.
Yeah, a little Qualis to get your mouth wet. Yeah.
Delicious. Well, hey, let's dive into it here. Today, we are talking about the wonderful topic of healthcare cybersecurity. Healthcare cybersecurity and HIPAA compliance are critical things. Obviously, if you're in that industry, you know that. And if you're not in that industry, this is still a good episode because a lot of these compliance principles, a lot of the things that we were talking about probably filter over to your compliance requirements as well. It's all the same, just in different wrappers, really. We're talking about PHI, PII, all kinds of data requirements, tremendous amount of overlap. So that being said, I've done enough talking so far to start this episode out. Mike, why don't you take off here with the news?
49% of all of small medical practices don't have a cyber attack response plan. Cyber attacks are crippling the healthcare providers by posing a threat to core functions and patient privacy, according to the Software Advice Survey. Findings reveal 22% of small practices have experienced a ransomware attack. 45% of large practices have experienced a ransomware attack. 23% of small practices have experienced a data breach. 46% of these breaches were caused by avoidable human error. 42% of small practices and 25% of large practices spent no more than 2 hours in IT security and data privacy training in 2021. That's scary in and of itself. Small practices risk more significant losses in the event of a cyber attack, often due to lack of training and inadequate security technology and support staff.
It says 46% of breaches were caused by avoidable human error. Couldn't we argue that 100% of the breaches were caused by avoidable human error?
I mean, I would concur with that statement, but you'd have a big fight with a bunch of software developers right now.
Yeah, I'd go high 90s just to be safe. But yeah,
high 90. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That way everybody can put themselves in the 2-3%, right?
Yeah.
That's okay.
We're all, what was it back to? 50% of people think they're geniuses or whatever it was.
Yeah, they think they're 50% or 90% of people think they're above average intelligence.
Yeah, and we know that ain't true. Security flaws found in 82% of public sector software applications. Veracode has released new findings that show the public sector, basically the government, has the highest proportion of security flaws in its applications and maintains some of the lowest and slowest fix rates compared to other industry sectors. Analysis of data collected from 20 million scans across 500,000 applications revealed these public sector specific findings, like 60% of flaws in third-party libraries are unfixed after 2 years, which is double that of other sectors. The public sector has the highest proportion of applications with security flaws at 82%. Everybody that's surprised the government's behind the times, raise your hand. That's all of you, I think. All 3 million.
All 3 million? I did not raise my hand.
All right, so 2 million and less Laurel. So 3 million less Laurel. NSA employee indicted on sending classified data outside the agency. National Security Agency employees accused of sharing top secret national security information with an unauthorized individual in the private sector. The employee was arrested and the indictment unsealed on March 31st. The DOJ indictment alleges the NSA employee shared classified information relating to national defense on 13 occasions from February 2018 to June 2020. The NSA employee was aware the person was not entitled to receive the information and that the information could be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of any foreign government. The NSA employee allegedly sent materials while using his personal email address because the personal email address is not considered authorized storage location for classified information. The NSA employees faces 13 counts of willful retention of national defense information on top of 13 counts of willful transmission. Each charge carries a maximum 10 years in federal prison.
Somebody didn't read the acceptable use policy.
Exactly. Palo Alto Networks firewalls, VPNs vulnerable to OpenSSL bug. There's two stories on this, one by Tech Radar, one by Bluefin Computer. A variety of VPN and firewall products from Palo Alto Networks have been found to suffer from a high severity vulnerability the company has warned. According to Bleeping Computer, PanOS, Global Protect app, and Cortex XDR agent software are running on a vulnerable version of the OpenSSL library. The vulnerability tracked as CVE 2022-0778 was discovered 3 weeks ago, and if abused, can enable a denial of attack, service attack, or remotely crash the vulnerable endpoint. Nearly 40% of Macs left exposed to 2 0-day exploits. Between 35 and 40% of all supported Macs might be at a heightened risk of compromise for two 0-day vulnerabilities that Apple has said are being exploited in the wild, but for which the company has not yet issued a patch. I don't know why. Apple disclosed the 2 vulnerabilities, CVE 2022-22675 and CVE 2022-22674, last week, and described them as impacting devices running its Mac OS, iOS, iPadOS operating systems. The company released updated versions of the software that address the issue for users of Apple's latest Mac OS Monterey and iOS 15 and iPad OS 15 operations. However, in a break from its usual practice, Apple appears so far at least not to have released a corresponding fix for the flaws in the 2 immediately preceding versions of the Mac OS Big Sur and Catalina. So they only fixed Monterey. VMware addresses several critical vulnerabilities in multiple products. VMware has addressed critical remote code vulnerabilities in multiple products, including VMware's Workspace, One Access, VMware Identity Manager, vRealize Lifecycle Manager, vRealize Automation, VMware Cloud Foundation products. The virtualization giant urges its customer to address the critical vulnerability immediately to prevent its exploitation. The good news is that the company is not aware of the attacks in the wild being exploited, and users that cannot immediately fix these issues can apply the workaround instructions provided by the company. That's all in the article. There's a couple of headlines that are interesting. MailChimp is breached, intruders conducting phishing attacks against crypto customers. Germany shut down the Hydra darknet market. Identity fraud skyrockets as hackers stick to pre-pandemic techniques, and American Express got shut down for a while. Their users report login and payment issues. So with that, Laurel, what do we got?
Now, exploits. Thanks for the news, Mike. Some good headlines there. Make sure you guys check that out on the site where we post all that info. A little bit more this week about Spring for Shell. I just wanted to let everybody know if you haven't heard, a CVE is not yet to be assigned. However, as of Thursday, a release of Spring Boot has landed. So you do have the ability to upgrade your Spring frameworks off of 5.3.18 and 5.2.20, the vulnerable version. So make sure you look into that. Also, another exploit for this week: if you're using Postgres SQL, you should know there is a remote code execution with a really nice done Python POC to make this happen. And this payload is downloadable for everybody. So if you're using PostgreSQL 9.3 to 11.7, make sure you're updating that or adding in some sort of deny lists for some of the patterns. So 14.2 is the current version for PostgreSQL. So if you're not on 14.2, what are you doing? That's all I've got for this week.
I would guess they're probably in the public sector then, because they're way behind on patching.
Based on the news anyways. Yeah.
Well, outstanding. Let's dive into healthcare cybersecurity. But first, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and we'll be right back.
Want even more Cyber Rants? Be sure to subscribe to the Cyber Rants podcast. Get your copy of our best-selling book, Cyber Rants, on Amazon today. This podcast is brought to you by Silent Sector, a firm dedicated to building world-class cybersecurity programs for mid-market and emerging companies across the U.S. Silent Sector also provides industry-leading penetration tests and cyber risk assessments. Visit silentsector.com and contact us today.
And we're back with more talk about HIPAA compliance, healthcare, cybersecurity, all the good stuff. And with that, I want to preface this conversation with the fact that a lot of organizations, I think this is a problem, we need to talk about it. A lot of organizations in the healthcare space think as HIPAA, or think of HIPAA as being their only requirement, right? Or being their requirement and why they secure their organization for HIPAA compliance, right? But I would argue there's a lot more to think about than just HIPAA compliance. Yes, it's a necessary thing that we need to do in the healthcare space, but there's a lot more to a holistic cybersecurity program. So I want to remind everybody that to start with. But first, I wanted to ask you guys, do you guys have any particular stories, tips, pointers, anything that you see going on today regularly in the healthcare field that needs to be addressed?
Well, I would say first, for you consultants out there that are trying to get into the medical space, make sure you spell HIPAA correctly.
It's two I's, 4 P's, and 4 A's.
Exactly, just like Mississippi.
That's a key thing. No, okay, so I have one that I think is a problem, and that is the medical devices that are in some of the rooms and the operating places and things like that, where they've been purchased from a medical manufacturer that may manufacture this certain X-ray machine or whatever the case may be. And it comes with a predefined, pre-engineered, pre-configured version of Windows 98 with the app that's built in DOS in order for you to use the X-ray machine, and you cannot update it. But it has USB drives all over it. It's got like 14 USB drives and FireWire and a network port. But they don't want you updating it or modifying the software. The vendor, the vendor of this medical device. I think that's a huge problem for health organizations right now. Is, like you said, Zach, it kind of has to be a blend of your healthcare information, right? Because the healthcare industry wants you to, they have the oversight to say you need to secure your healthcare information. That doesn't give you the excuse to de-scope all the rest of your technology. Right. And so a lot of health organizations are kind of blending that HIPAA with NIST and other things. And so as they work to secure the technologies in the organization, they run into this. I think they run into this problem a lot of all these devices that have been, purchased, and they're technology devices, but they can't, how do you manage those things? You know what I mean? If the vendor's saying don't touch it.
Yeah, and then a lot of them put it all on a flat network. So once you get a hold of one of those, you're just free. You have free reign.
Free reign.
Let's dig into that a little bit. Let's talk about, for those organizations or those leaders and companies right now, healthcare, whether it be facilities or laboratories or anything like that in the healthcare space. What can they do when they face the fact that, hey, we're going to have to run this equipment that was built many, many, many years ago. It's deprecated. We can't upgrade it, but it still has to exist in our environment. What would your recommendations be to them to secure the organization that's faced with that?
Well, the simplest thing is to not connect to the network if it doesn't need to be.
Right. But I mean, if you're going to connect it to the network, a lot of these actually need AD to be to work. And if you're not going to connect, if you have to connect to the network, you put it in a separate VLAN, right? Secure VLAN.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'd even go one step further and say they should, somewhat be air gapped. If they require Active Directory, they should be on their own air gapped infrastructure with their own AD.
Yeah.
That way, in case there's a ransomware incident, you don't lose. You lose your vital machines that are providing things like life support and stuff like that, right? So certainly a bad idea to keep them all on a flat network with the rest of your technologies that support the hospital or the healthcare system that you're running.
Yeah, and then you can always, they don't need to connect directly to the internet. There can be an intermediary, some kind of jump server that allows you to get to them, and that kind of thing. I mean, or jump box, I should say. So yeah, I mean there are ways around it, and we can't be really specific because we don't know the specific requirements of every device out there, right? But we have dealt with companies before where I just remember one where the CEO, we actually wound up meeting with the CEO, Zach and I did, and the guy came in and said, "Nope, I don't believe this is real. There's no way it can get hacked, even though it's on the internet." And the head of security, I think he quit like 2 weeks later. So.
Yeah, weird stuff happens, right? Certainly, nothing is impermeable to cyber attacks, right? Any electronic over time is going to be compromised with time and pressure, right? It's all you really need. But to your point, yeah, there's a lot of different devices out there that the medical industry has to deal with. A lot of it, requires some form of a beacon home
Yeah.
where you got to plug it onto the network and it's got to call out to an API out there with the vendor, or or it requires Active Directory. Hopefully, you've got some of the devices that don't require any network connectivity at all. They just simply require a power cord.
Right.
And in those cases, I think it's important to, make sure that even if they have network connectivity, if they don't need to be on your network, don't let them be, because of the deprecated software. It's going to cause you problems. So it's going to come up in a vulnerability scan. It's going to come up in an audit. If you can justify keeping those things disconnected from the network, I think you're going to be better off in both in the HIPAA audits and then in any other type of technology audit, governance audit that you're doing, like NIST or anything else, because you can definitively say that they're air gapped, right? They require no network connectivity. So it's a vendor managed, third party, pre-engineered device that you purchased, doesn't require network connectivity, but if anybody gets on it, looks, it's running usually they're running a deprecated operating system, right? Or a deprecated patch level, because they build them and they do an accreditation and a certification for the device functionality based on the operating system that is being leveraged at the time that they're built, right? And so they get this very stabilized build for this medical device, and then they reproduce it over and over and over again. And so it works as it came pre-engineered. If you start throwing patches and other stuff on there, it might not work. And if it's providing breathing or other types of emergency services to patients, there's a reason why you don't want these things being updated. But it causes that sort of break in a compliance versus a security posture that you're supposed to be maintaining as an organization. And I think that's, I don't know. I mean, that you guys driving, don't raise your hand while you got your hands on the wheel, but I imagine that there's a lot of healthcare professionals out there that are kind of feeling the burn on this particular issue here.
Well, there's been a lot of healthcare hacks lately too, and I have to believe that some of it is tied to the devices out there. But one of the things that we also have to keep in mind is, unlike a computer that gets recycled every 3 to 5 years, some of these devices, A, are highly expensive, and B, will be around for 20 years. They're not going to be replaced every 3 or 4 year, 5 years. And that causes problems for the manufacturer, because when they built the device originally, Windows XP was supported. Well, now Windows XP is 5 operating systems ago, or 4 operating systems ago from Microsoft. So there has to be a better way of doing this. And, but with everything out there, there's going to be someone trying to break into it, right? Someone's going to try and break it one way or another. Medical records, for whatever reason, are the key piece that is a holy grail for a lot of cyber criminals, simply because that's what they're going for and what they can mine, because there's a whole lot of data in there. But also the other thing is that we've seen is that there's a lot of foreign espionage on a lot of the high-end research that we're doing, like at the Mayo Clinic and other places like that, on cancer and limbs and that sort of thing, artificial limbs. A lot of that biogenic stuff. So they're trying to hack our research and find out what we know and give themselves a jump ahead. So it's even more critical to keep those type of systems even further locked down, air gapped if possible.
Yeah, there's certainly something to be said about the genome research that we're doing here in the United States, and that a lot of the big health organizations, they're maintaining a lot of that DNA genetic information on Americans and health patients. Okay. And so it is a good loot, right? And where I think the biggest struggle, from an attack vector that hospitals have is really, and healthcare organizations have, is the physical security. A lot of times that, if you go visit somebody in the hospital, I guarantee you'll see that the nurse's station is really a card table pushed up against the wall with 2 computers and a monitor up there. Yeah. And, those computers are hooked up to the network, and they have USB ports exposed. And that's the question is, do you have the circumvention for, a criminal that comes in with, an ARM driven or, a mini Linux driven USB that can then, dump ransomware or yank out files or deploy some sort of remote access toolkit, like Nano Cortex or anything like that. Do you have USB protection where, you've disabled the USB or you've whitelisted a specific type of USB drive. I think that's probably, one of the largest concerns for the attack vector, because everybody goes into the hospital. And a lot of times those computers that the staff are using are right there accessible to, everybody who's walking through the hospital.
Yeah. And I think the argument is, I got a patient crashing. I can't remember my 14-character password, so they have the usability problem.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, they do.
So, yeah, that's an excellent point. The physical security aspect, which we, just talked about, right, in the previous episode. But I think there's a misconception out there that, this cybercrime happens from criminals overseas and, the Chinese and the Russians and stuff. Yeah, absolutely it does. But people forget that on the dark web, people want to make a quick buck, right? They can get these jobs in dark web forums and postings and all that, and go out, and that job might be, hey, go, plug this thumb drive, or, load this malware on your thumb drive and go plug it into some healthcare facilities around town, right? And we'll pay in Bitcoin, that sort of thing. So that absolutely does exist, and does happen. There are criminals right here in the United States, and it could even be a college kid that needs to make an extra buck. So,
well, everybody can look up the story. I mean, to your point, Zach, sorry to jump in here, but everybody can look up the story that just happened in Memphis, Tennessee, where a man essentially wearing scrubs walked into St. Francis and stole a bunch of equipment.
Yeah.
And so, and this is just a homeless person that happened to be at like a Goodwill or St. Vincent de Paul, and was able to find some old scrubs and threw them on and walked right into the hospital and walked right out with a bunch of stuff. So you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be, the Iranian, in the, drinking Mountain Dew in the, in the basement of, his hut or whatever, you know what I mean? It certainly can be, very, very easily can be an American that, is just, down and out, or, anybody else here who's, wanting to be malicious.
Yeah, definitely concur.
Let's talk about everybody's favorite subject for a few minutes here, HIPAA compliance. And we happen to have a absolute compliance wizard on the line today, Mr. Mike Rotondo. Mike,
you do a lot of HIPAA audits.
You do a lot of HIPAA work. And what are you seeing? I mean, where are some of the big fails in HIPAA compliance, and how can organizations better understand whether or not they are in alignment with the requirements for the PHI? The
biggest fail I see, and the most consistent one I see, is that someone will say, we have to be HIPAA compliant, so we need all this documentation. So they'll go buy a documentation set and then never look at it, never read it. So when they come to an audit, I've actually had this happen. All right, so are you doing XYZ function? I don't know what that is. And that's from the HIPAA compliance officer. So there's a lot of people that are just trying to check the box so they can say they're compliant. So that's the biggest, that's the one that always sticks in my mind. Documentation needs to be personalized. You need to go through this. You need to verify, what is important, what is being done. And then the other thing that I have is that the usability factor that we always talk about, that balance. Small companies that are growing into larger companies always have we've always done it this way attitude, which is not necessarily compliant with HIPAA, nor is it compliant with a security framework. And I think what's missed is a lot of these companies are like, well, I'm doing these HIPAA checkboxes, but that does not make you secure. So you have to couple HIPAA with NIST or CIS or something just to ensure that you are actually secure while being compliant. And the best customers out there are the ones that understand that and are doing both. So that's my 30,000 foot level view of HIPAA without outing anybody.
Mike is the I in HIPAA.
Yeah.
So. Well, outstanding. Well, the other thing too that healthcare organizations face that more prevalent than some other types of companies, maybe tech companies, even brick and mortar, manufacturing, stuff like that. It's just like we mentioned before, the volume of people that go through the facility and the fact that you have to have access all over the place. So I think it's important for healthcare organizations, and we certainly do a lot of this, and some organizations are being more proactive than others. But remember to get your testing done, get your technical testing done. By that, I mean penetration testing, right? So get your internal and external network pen testing, your wireless penetration testing, even, social engineering tests, right? Physical intrusion tests. Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Get the actual testing done as it makes sense for the organization, as you can, do that. Start with pen testing, because you can do everything right on the governance side, and a misconfiguration or something could leave you open. So I'd recommend that. I mean, that goes for anybody, but I think healthcare organizations tend to have a broader attack surface because of how they have to operate and how they have to serve their clientele. So
there's a higher profile target too.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got super valuable data, and they're open to the public essentially. So it's a very difficult it's a very difficult attack surface to close effectively. And just being HIPAA compliant won't cut it. Unfortunately, you'll have to blend that with NIST or CIS or something else that adds that more complete holistic view, and not try to just protect the medical data, because you'll cause yourself problems by doing that.
One of the other problems I was thinking of is the social engineering aspect of it, not going at the medical establishment, but going at regular people, right? So if I call you and say, hey, Mr. Chavez, I'm calling to follow up on your surgery you had 3 weeks ago. How's everything going? Well, most people in their mind are going to say, all right, well, he's obviously involved with my medical practice, because how else would he know I had surgery? So
they forgot that Facebook post. They put them in the hospital, tagging the hospital, and the nurses.
My room number, but
I'm gonna say, doctor, I've been fighting like a goat, and I can't stop ever since you worked on me. What happened?
So my point is that the social engineering factor goes the other way. So you can break into somebody. These companies go and they hack the healthcare provider, then they can go ahead and hack, just a regular person, and say, because they've got all this information. Oh, can you verify your birth date? Can you verify your address? Can you give me a credit card? Can you do this? And because most people, I would say most older people, I don't know if it still translates down to younger people, but will trust a doctor implicitly without any question, or someone who comes across with medical information.
Yeah, and there's been some fraud too, where some bogus collections agencies have been trying to falsely settle medical debt. So, I think that's a big thing too, right? A lot of insurance is not going to cover a whole bunch of the costs of procedures, and so especially with COVID happening, you might have some extra costs at the hospital. You now owe the hospital, and if the data is siphoned, these fraudsters were essentially saying, hey, we can settle your $25,000 hospital debt for $500 today. What I mean? Something ridiculous. And it was actually, it's a viable scheme that's certainly brought them some money. So be leery of those things out there, right? But I mean, that unfortunately is, you're right, that social engineering aspect. There's a certain trust, right, that comes with the doctor-patient confidentiality thing,
Right. So that, just puts it more, incumbent upon the healthcare providers to be that much more secure, because it's not just your data got breached. All of a sudden, the repercussions of your data breach expand far and away beyond, your what you see immediately. It's every patient.
And if you look at previous cyber attacks, you'll notice that probably one of the most common ways that cyber criminals, get a leverage is that they're abusing trust. They're abusing your trust, right? They're abusing things you trust. SolarWinds, great example. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yep.
That's why it's best not to trust anything or anybody ever again.
or trust
Zero
but verify,
trust.
you know what I mean? Whatever. Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Zero trust, no trust.
Yeah.
It's negative,
Yeah.
like negative a million trust.
Yeah, just
It's
just pessimism, and just yeah, I think that is
It's
the
not
essence of
about the
social
glass is half
engineering.
full or the glass is half empty or the glass is holding half of its required contents. The glass might be a cyber criminal trying to take your data.
exactly.
That's right. That's right.
I got a voicemail the other day from someone pretending to be from a healthcare provider saying, wanted to contact you. Your employer contacted us and wanted to follow up with you on your healthcare. I was just like, all right, my employer? No, I'm the employer. And I do our benefits, and I haven't contacted anybody. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff out there. So
Yeah, but nice try. Wrong turn. Try again.
Wrong number.
Yeah.
Wrong number. Well, don't be social engineering Mike. He'll get you.
Yeah. But I do think that physical security penetration test is super important for medical industries, because I think a lot of focus is put on the electronic controls, and they do a pretty good job. I think, we obviously everybody's going to have those devices that, from the vendor that you don't even know what to do with. It's just like the horror show of the hospital.
Right.
But I think a lot of lax is been put into the physical security aspect of it, and there'll be a day. Today's probably not the day, but there'll be a day where I get to tell a very generic version of a story where I got into a medical healthcare organization's data center.
Yeah.
And that really happened. That's not like, I'm get to tell this fake story. No, it really did have two witnesses right here on the podcast with me. so we'll,
I know nothing.
You know nothing. We'll talk about nothing. Anyways, but things like that do happen, and I think it's important that the healthcare organizations take a harder look at physical security, because the adversaries, again, they're going to abuse that trust. Well, everybody coming into the hospital needs to be here. Not necessarily true. You know what I mean? And we can see that from news stories and previous problems.
One key factor when you're doing physical penetration testing is to ensure that the people that know about it are working the day you do the test, because otherwise it can go really bad.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we have
end up in jail.
You might, or tased. You're certainly going to be held at taser point or gun point if you're pulling these off, right? But I think you said, Mike, it's important that our process is that executive leadership is aware, and they sign our little get out of jail free card, so to speak, right? That we're carrying around. But make sure the people that know are there.
Well, as we wrap up today, back to your first article that you listed, Mike, in the news, 49% of small medical practices don't have a cyber attack response plan. I would call it an incident response plan, but cyber attack response plan is good too. And then 45% of large practices have experienced a ransom attack. 22% of small practices have experienced a ransom attack. So really, it's not a matter of if, but when this stuff happens. So you're in the healthcare industry, be prepared out there, and also be prepared for an eventual HIPAA audit as well, and follow a major framework. So I don't want to beat a dead horse with that, because I think we tell people that on just about every episode. But it's got to be done. So that said, any final words of wisdom before we wrap up?
That following a framework is a very good prescriptive daily routine that I think all organizations that leverage technology for any part of their business have to be doing. So you certainly need to follow a framework and do your best to align to that. I think that's, you're going to do yourself as a security professional or security leader or a business leader, you're going to do the most justice to the people that entrust you with their data and your employees and everybody else who utilize your service. You're going to do them the best justice and by following some form of framework for your operational processes.
Yeah, you keep in mind, compliant is not secure.
Nope. We say it a lot, but it's true. It's a dumb. I'm tired of saying it, but I'm still shocked by how much I hear that people think being compliant is security.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, repetition is key to success in a lot of areas of life, and the fundamentals are too, right? So before you go out and shopping for the latest, fanciest technology you can find and get your hands on that you saw at Black Hat or whatever, make sure you get the fundamentals in place, and
Yeah.
that's gonna help you manage risk a lot better. So that being said, thank you for listening to the CyberRants podcast. Check it out, cyberrantspodcast.com, where you'll see the news articles, and there's web form. You can reach out with topics you'd like us to cover. Reach out there, or LinkedIn. I don't really use any other social media, but we are accessible. And I hope you enjoyed this. Please subscribe, rate it, share it if you like this episode. If you know people that can benefit from us, helps us get the word out, and news and everything else that we think people should know to protect their organizations. So have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Pick up your copy of the CyberRants book on Amazon today. And if you're looking to take your cybersecurity program to the next level, visit us online at www.silentsector.com. Join us next time for another edition of the CyberRants podcast.
We are not on Facebook or Twitter.